Howard Maddox cracked 3 eggs into the cast iron skillet, the sizzle filling the kitchen of their Bend home. 6:30 in the morning meant Calder would be up soon, hungry and ready for school. Howard had learned to time breakfast perfectly during the 4 years since June died. "Dad, can I have extra bacon today?" Calder's voice came from the doorway, his dark hair sticking up in cowlicks. "Sure, buddy." Howard smiled and added 2 more strips to the pan. "Math test today, right?" "Yeah, but I studied. Mrs. Peterson says I'm getting better at fractions." The sound of heels on hardwood announced Karen's arrival. She swept into the kitchen wearing a cream-colored designer dress that cost more than most people made in a week. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect ponytail, makeup flawless despite the early hour. "Coffee ready." She didn't look at either of them, moving straight to the expensive espresso machine she'd insisted they buy. "In the pot," Howard said, flipping Calder's eggs. "You're up early. Meeting my mother for lunch." Karen's voice carried an edge. "We need to discuss some things." Howard set Calder's plate down and ruffled his son's hair. "Eat up, Calder. Bus comes in 20 minutes. "What kind of things?" Howard asked, though he already suspected. Karen finally turned around, coffee cup in hand. Her green eyes held that look he'd learned to recognize, the one that meant she wanted something expensive. "Mother's house is in trouble, Howard. The bank is threatening foreclosure." "I see." Howard poured himself coffee, keeping his voice level. "What's she asking for?" $50,000. It would cover the arrears and give her breathing room. The number hung in the air. Calder looked up from his breakfast, sensing the tension. "Dad, what's foreclosure?" Calder asked. "It's when someone can't pay for their house anymore," Howard explained, keeping his eyes on Karen. "So the bank takes it back." "That's awful," Calder said. "Can't grandmother get a job?" Karen's jaw tightened. "It's complicated, sweetheart. Adults have different obligations." Howard sat down across from his son. "Calder, go brush your teeth. We'll talk more tonight about your test." When they were alone, Howard spoke quietly. "The answer is no." "Howard, please. She's my mother. She's 63 years old, Karen. She's had plenty of time to figure out her finances." Karen's composure cracked. "How can you be so cold? This is family. My family is sitting right here." Howard gestured toward the hallway where Calder was brushing his teeth. "Your mother made her choices. Bad investments, refusing to downsize that mansion, living beyond her means for years. That's not my problem. She raised me alone after Dad went to prison, and I've been paying for her lifestyle mistakes ever since we got married." Howard's voice stayed calm, but steel entered his tone. "The wine country trips, the spa weekends, the designer clothes she buys you. Add it up, Karen. I've already given her more than 50,000. Karen slammed her coffee cup down. "She's drowning, Howard. What am I supposed to tell her?" "Tell her what any financial advisor would say. If she wants a bailout, she should call the bank, not me. You don't understand what it's like to watch your parents suffer." Howard stood up, his chair scraping against the tile. "I watched my wife die of cancer, Karen. I held her hand while she fought for every breath. Don't talk to me about watching a parent suffer." The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Calder's footsteps returning. "Ready, Dad," Calder announced, backpack slung over his shoulder. Howard forced a smile. "Let's go get that bus." As they walked to the front door, Karen called after them. "This conversation isn't over." Howard didn't turn around. "Yes, it is." The wine bar in downtown Bend buzzed with a lunch crowd. Karen sat in a corner booth, her untouched salad wilting while she waited. Lenora Carrington arrived 15 minutes late, as always, wearing clothes that cost more than she could afford and an expression of barely contained panic. "Sorry, darling. Traffic was murder." Lenora slid into the booth, her silver hair perfectly styled despite her supposed stress. "Did you order wine?" "We need wine." "I ordered a bottle of Pinot Noir." Karen's voice was flat. He said no. Lenora's face hardened. "Just like that? No discussion." "Oh, there was discussion. He lectured me about your financial choices and threw June in my face again. The dead wife card. How predictable." Lenora signaled the waitress for another glass. "That man thinks his tragedy makes him untouchable." "Mother, what are we going to do?" "The bank won't extend the deadline." Lenora leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Howard Maddox is a man who's never truly lost anything he valued. His first wife died, yes, but that wasn't someone taking something from him. That was God or fate or cancer. He's never faced real betrayal. What are you saying? I'm saying men like Howard only understand one language: loss. Real loss. The kind that makes them realize how much they need what they have. Karen felt a chill run down her spine. Mother, I'm not following. Of course you are. Lenora's eyes glittered. You're a smart girl. Sometimes men like him only understand loss. Teach him what that feels like. You want me to leave him? I want you to make him understand that his family isn't guaranteed. That his precious little boy needs a mother. And mothers sometimes make difficult choices when they're not properly supported. Karen stared at her mother. You're talking about using Calder. I'm talking about making Howard realize what matters most to him. When he's faced with the possibility of losing his son, $50,000 will seem like pocket change. I can't just take Calder away. Howard would call the police. You're not taking him away permanently. You're creating a situation that makes Howard reconsider his priorities. Lenora sipped her wine. Sometimes children get confused, wander off, end up in places where they're safe, but their fathers are worried sick. These things happen. You want me to abandon him somewhere. I want you to help him get lost for a few hours. Somewhere safe, somewhere public, somewhere Howard will panic, but Calder won't be in any real danger. A church, perhaps. Churches take care of lost children. Karen felt sick. Mother, that's what desperate people do when their families won't help them. Lenora's voice turned hard. Your father is in prison, Karen. I'm about to lose everything. You married a man with money, and he's refusing to help. What exactly did you think was going to happen? The weight of her mother's expectations settled on Karen's shoulders like a lead blanket. She'd spent her entire life trying to make Lenora proud, to restore the family's status after her father's fraud conviction destroyed everything. How would it even work? Howard drops Calder at school every morning, right? You could pick him up early, tell the school it's a family emergency. Take him somewhere safe, but public. A church would be perfect, they'd call the police immediately, but Calder would be protected. Howard would be frantic. After a few hours of pure terror, he'd realize that family emergencies require family solutions. And then you come back contrite, explaining that you panicked about your mother's situation and made a terrible mistake. You apologize, promise it won't happen again, and suggest that maybe Howard should reconsider helping prevent future family crises. Karen's stomach churned. What if he just gets angry? What if he leaves me? He won't. Howard's weakness is that boy. He'll do anything to protect Calder, including putting up with a wife who occasionally makes poor decisions under stress. Lenora reached across the table and squeezed Karen's hand. Trust me, darling. I know men like Howard. They need to be reminded that they're not in complete control. The waitress approached their table. Ladies, can I get you anything else? Just the check, Karen said quietly. As they waited, Lenora spoke again. Time is running out, Karen. The bank won't wait much longer. Sometimes we have to make difficult choices to protect our family. Karen nodded slowly, already hating herself for what she was about to do, that Howard's phone rang at 2:15 on Thursday afternoon. He was reviewing structural plans for a new bridge project when Pastor Malachi Brent's name appeared on the screen. Hello, Pastor. Howard, I need you to come to the church immediately. We have Calder here, and he's upset. Howard's blood turned to ice. What do you mean you have Calder? He should be in school. Someone dropped him off about 20 minutes ago. He's safe, but he's asking for you. He says Karen brought him here and told him to wait inside until you came to get him. The structural plans scattered as Howard stood up, knocking his chair backward. I'm on my way. The drive to Faith Community Church took 8 minutes that felt like 8 hours. Howard's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles went white. His mind raced through possibilities. None of them good. He found Calder in Pastor Brent's office, sitting in an oversized chair with his school backpack clutched against his chest. The boy's eyes were red-rimmed, but he wasn't crying anymore. Dad! Calder jumped up and ran into Howard's arms. Howard knelt down and held his son tight, breathing in the familiar scent of his strawberry shampoo. Are you okay, buddy? Are you hurt? I'm not hurt, but I was scared. Pastor Brent closed his office door. Howard. He says Karen picked him up from school around 1 o'clock. Told the office it was a family emergency. She drove him here, walked him to the front door, and told him to go inside and wait for you. She left him here alone. Howard's voice was deadly quiet. One of our volunteers found him in the sanctuary about 20 minutes ago. He was just sitting in the front pew, holding his backpack. Howard pulled back to look at Calder's face. What did Karen say to you exactly? She said there was an emergency and we had to leave school. She was crying in the car. She kept saying she was sorry and that she loved me, but sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices. Then what happened? She brought me here. I said I should go inside and wait. She said you'd come get me and that I should tell you she was sorry, but she had to help grandmother. Calder's voice got smaller. Is she coming back, Dad? Howard's chest felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. I don't know, buddy. Pastor Brent stepped forward. Howard, I have to ask, is there anything going on at home? Any reason Karen might do something like this? We had a disagreement this morning about money. Her mother wanted a loan. Howard's voice sounded mechanical even to his own ears. Karen was upset when I refused. I see. Pastor Brent's expression grew grave. I'm required to report this to the authorities, Howard. A child being abandoned, even at a church, is a serious matter. Do what you have to do. Within an hour, 2 police officers arrived to take statements. Calder answered their questions with the straightforward honesty of a 6-year-old, while Howard felt his world rearranging itself into something unrecognizable. Has your stepmother ever done anything like this before? Officer Martinez asked Calder gently. No, but she doesn't like me very much. She says I remind her that Dad loved someone else first. Howard felt something cold and final settle in his chest. The officers exchanged glances. Mr. Maddox, Officer Chin said, we're going to need to contact your wife. Do you have any idea where she might be? No. Howard realized he meant it. I have no idea where my wife is. The drive home was silent except for Calder's questions about whether they should make dinner for Karen in case she came back. Howard told him they'd order pizza instead. That night, after Calder fell asleep, Howard sat in his home office staring at his computer screen. Karen's car was gone from the garage. Her clothes were still in their closet, but her jewelry box was empty. Her passport was missing. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Had to help Mother. Sorry. We'll explain when I can. Please don't be angry. Howard read the message 3 times, then deleted it. He didn't reply. He pulled up the contact information for the best family law attorney in Central Oregon instead. Arlo Jensen found Howard in the parking lot of their engineering firm the next morning, sitting in his truck with the engine off and the windows down. Howard's normally precise appearance was rumpled, wrinkled shirt, unshaven face, hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it. You look like hell, Arlo said, leaning against the truck's passenger door. Feel worse. Howard stepped out of the truck, grabbing his coffee cup and briefcase. Thanks for watching Calder last night. Nancy loved having him over. He's good for our kids, reminds them that not everyone gets everything handed to them. Arlo studied his friend's face. You want to talk about what happened? They walked toward the building together. Howard had called Arlo the night before, explaining the situation in clipped, factual sentences. Arlo was one of the few people who knew the full story of Howard's first marriage, his grief, and his too quick decision to marry Karen. Not much to talk about. She made her choice. Police have any leads on where she went? Don't care. Howard's voice was flat. I filed for emergency custody this morning. Full custody petition goes in next week. Arlo stopped walking. Howard, you sure you want to go nuclear right away? Maybe she'll come back, explain herself. She abandoned my son at a church, Arlo. Left him sitting there alone because I wouldn't give her mother 50 grand. Howard's voice stayed level, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. There's no explanation that makes that acceptable. I'm not defending what she did. It was wrong. But maybe nothing. Howard pulled the building door open harder than necessary. She showed me exactly who she is. I believe her. Inside the building, Howard's secretary handed him a stack of messages. 3 were from reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of the story. 1 was from a social worker wanting to schedule a home visit. 2 were from Karen's lawyer. She already got a lawyer? Arlo asked, reading over Howard's shoulder. Fast work. Means she planned this. Howard tossed the messages in the trash. Means it wasn't some panicked mistake. They reached Howard's office. Through the glass walls, their co-workers tried not to stare. Small towns meant small secrets, and word was already spreading. "What's your plan?" Arlo asked, closing the office door behind them. Howard sat down at his desk and pulled up his calendar. Win. Full custody, no visitation, no contact. Cut her off financially. Change the locks. Move if I have to. That's not a plan. That's revenge. Howard looked up sharply. Good. Arlo had known Howard for 8 years, since they'd both started at the firm. He'd watched his friend grieve his first wife, struggle as a single father, and make the mistake of marrying too quickly. But he'd never seen this expression on Howard's face before. Cold, calculating, final. Whatever revenge you're cooking up, just make sure Calder's still proud of his dad at the end of it. Howard leaned back in his chair. Karen made this choice, not me. She involved my son in her scheme to manipulate me. She left him sitting alone in a church pew while she drove off to wherever the hell she is now. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I won't rest until they're both ruined. The promise hung in the air between them like a curse. Karen returned 3 weeks later with a lawyer, a story, and a strategy. Howard first learned about it when his attorney, Janet Morrison, called him at work. They filed a counterpetition, Janet said without preamble. She's claiming emotional neglect and seeking shared custody. Howard gripped his phone tighter. Emotional neglect of who? Both you and Calder, according to her filing. She claims you're emotionally unavailable, that you use work to avoid dealing with family issues, and that your refusal to help her mother created an impossible situation that forced her to make desperate choices. Desperate choices. Is that what we're calling child abandonment now? Howard, I need you to stay calm. Her lawyer is Marcus Weber. He's expensive, and he's good. This isn't going to be a simple custody fight. That afternoon, Howard sat in Janet's downtown office reviewing Karen's petition. The language was careful, clinical, designed to make her sound like a victim rather than the perpetrator. She says here that I consistently prioritized work obligations over family emotional needs. Howard read aloud. That I demonstrated callous indifference to her mother's financial crisis. That my rigid and controlling behavior created an atmosphere of emotional isolation. It's standard divorce strategy, Janet explained. Paint the other spouse as cold and distant. The abandonment at the church is characterized as a mental health crisis brought on by feelings of helplessness and rejection. Mental health crisis. Howard set the papers down. Where was this mental health crisis when she was planning this with her mother over wine? You have evidence of that. Not direct evidence. But I know Karen, and I know Lenora. This wasn't spontaneous. Janet made notes on her legal pad. We need to be prepared for them to paint you as an unfeeling workaholic who drove your wife to desperation. They'll use your emotional control against you. What do you mean? I mean that your ability to stay calm under pressure, which serves you well as an engineer, might look like emotional unavailability to a family court judge. Howard stared out the window at the Cascade Mountains. Snow still capped the peaks, even in late spring. So because I don't fall apart when things get difficult, I'm a bad father? No, but we need to show that you're emotionally present for Calder. We need witnesses who can testify to your relationship with your son, your involvement in his daily life, your emotional availability. I can provide that. Good. Because Weber is going to argue that Karen's actions, while misguided, came from a place of genuine distress about her family situation. He'll say she made a poor choice, but that it doesn't reflect her overall fitness as a parent. Howard felt the familiar cold rage settling in his chest. She left a 6-year-old boy alone in a church because I wouldn't give her money. How is that not relevant to her fitness as a parent? It's completely relevant. But Weber will argue it was an aberration, not a pattern. That's why we need to establish that it was calculated, not impulsive. Then that's what we'll do. The discovery phase of the custody battle revealed details about Karen's past that Howard had never fully understood. Her lawyer's strategy required painting her as a victim of circumstances, which meant providing background information that Howard found both illuminating and damning. Karen Elizabeth Carrington had grown up in privilege in Lake Oswego, attending private schools and summer camps that cost more than most families made in a year. Her father, David Carrington, had owned a successful investment firm until federal investigators discovered he'd been running an elaborate Ponzi scheme. Howard sat in Janet's office reviewing the financial records that had been subpoenaed. She never told me the full extent of her father's crimes. According to these records, he stole over $12 million from clients over an 8-year period, Janet said. Most of it went to fund the family's lifestyle, the house, the cars, Karen's education, vacations, jewelry for Lenora. So when the scheme collapsed, they lost everything. The house was seized, the bank accounts frozen, the cars repossessed. Karen was 28 when it happened, already graduated from college, but never having held a real job. Howard studied a photo from the court files Karen at her father's sentencing, wearing a black dress that probably cost $1,000, standing next to her mother in front of courthouse. Both women looked stunned, as if they couldn't believe their comfortable world had evaporated. What did she do for the 2 years between her father's conviction and when I met her? Lived with her mother, worked part-time retail jobs, helped Lenora downsize to a smaller house. According to the background investigation, she had a series of short relationships with men who had money, including Dorian Pike. Yes. She lived with him for 8 months. He's agreed to testify, by the way. Howard looked up from the files. About what? The pattern. According to Pike, Karen and Lenora always worked together. Karen would find men who were emotionally vulnerable widowers, divorcees, men with children who needed a mother figure. She'd play the role of the perfect girlfriend until she could move in. Then Lenora would start having emergencies that required financial help. How many men? Pike knows of at least 3 others before you. The pattern was always the same. Karen would become indispensable. Then pressure would start for larger and larger financial contributions to help her mother. Howard felt sick. So, I was just another mark. According to Pike, yes. But Howard, this actually helps us. It establishes a pattern of manipulation and calculated behavior. It shows that the church incident wasn't an emotional breakdown. It was an escalation of a long-standing con game. Janet pulled out another file. There's more. Karen's education records show she was required to take psychological counseling in college after an incident with a roommate's boyfriend. What kind of incident? She was caught going through his personal belongings, including his financial records. When confronted, she claimed she was trying to help because she was worried about his spending habits. The college required counseling after the roommate pressed charges for theft. Charges were dropped. The boyfriend declined to press forward when Karen's family paid for his stolen items and made a donation to the college. But the counseling records note that Karen showed difficulty with boundaries and tendency to justify inappropriate behavior as being motivated by care for others. Howard closed the file. She told me she studied psychology because she wanted to help people. Technically true. She did study psychology, just not for the reasons she claimed. The picture that emerged from the court filings was of a woman who had spent her entire adult life learning to manipulate men who had something she needed. Howard realized that everything about their courtship, her interest in his work, her gentle way with Calder, her willingness to move slowly, had been calculated to make him feel like he'd found someone who understood his life as a widowed father. Janet, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Of course. Is there any chance I could lose this case? Janet was quiet for a long moment. Karen's lawyer is going to argue that your emotional distance drove her to desperation. He's going to say that a man who won't help his wife's mother save her house is too cold to be a good single parent. He's going to paint you as someone who uses his dead wife's memory as an excuse to avoid real emotional connection. But we have the abandonment. We have the pattern of manipulation. We have Calder's own words about feeling unwanted by Karen. And we have something else that's going to destroy her case. What? Dorian Pike has text messages. Kendra Fox had been working as a school counselor for 12 years, but she'd never had a case quite like Calder-Maddox. The 6-year-old sat across from her in her office, coloring a picture of his family while they talked. Can you tell me about the day at the church, Calder? Calder didn't look up from his drawing. He was carefully coloring his father's hair brown and his own hair the same shade. Karen appeared as a small figure in the corner, colored entirely in gray. Karen picked me up early from school. She said it was an emergency. What kind of emergency? She didn't say exactly. She was crying in the car, and she kept saying she was sorry. Calder switched to a red crayon for his father's shirt. She said sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices even when they don't want to. How did that make you feel? Scared. Karen doesn't usually cry, and she was driving really fast. Kendra made notes on her pad. What happened when you got to the church? She walked me to the front door and said I should go inside and wait for my dad. She said he would come get me and that I should tell him she was sorry, but she had to help grandmother. Did she say when she'd be back? Calder finally looked up from his drawing. No, but I don't think she's coming back. Dad doesn't talk about her anymore. How do you feel about that? Good, I think. Calder went back to coloring. She didn't like me very much anyway. What makes you say that? She told me once that I reminded her that Dad loved someone else first. She said it was hard for her to look at me because I looked like my real mom. Kendra felt her chest tighten. When did she say that? Lots of times. Usually when Dad wasn't home. She said Dad only married her because he needed someone to take care of me, but that he'd never love her as much as he loved my real mom. That must have been hard to hear. Yeah, but I think it was true. Dad has pictures of my real mom everywhere, but he doesn't have very many pictures of Karen. Calder held up his drawing. This is my family. In the picture, Howard and Calder stood in front of a house, holding hands and smiling. Karen was off to the side, much smaller and grayer than the other figures. But in the sky above them, Calder had drawn another figure, a woman with long brown hair and angel wings. Who's that? Kendra asked, pointing to the winged figure. That's my real mom. Dad says she watches over us from heaven. I think she's probably happy that Karen's gone. Why do you think that? Because now Dad smiles again. He stopped smiling when Karen lived with us. He thought I didn't notice, but I did. Kendra documented everything carefully. In 12 years of counseling children through difficult family situations, she learned to recognize the difference between a child parroting adult opinions and a child expressing genuine feelings. Calder's words carried the ring of authentic experience. Calder, can you tell me more about what Karen said to you about your father? Calder looked up from his coloring. She said Daddy doesn't love me enough to fight for me, but he's still here. She's not. The simple statement hit Kendra like a physical blow. In those few words, Calder had perfectly captured the manipulation he'd endured and his own resilience. Do you think Karen loves you? No. The answer came without hesitation. But that's okay. My dad loves me enough for both parents. And my real mom loves me from heaven. Karen can love someone else's kid. After Calder left, Kendra sat in her office staring at the drawing he'd left behind. In her professional opinion, this was one of the clearest cases of emotional manipulation she'd ever encountered. Karen hadn't just abandoned Calder. Physically, she'd spent months undermining his sense of security and belonging in his own home. She picked up her phone and called Howard's attorney. Janet Morrison's office. This is Kendra Fox at Bend Elementary. I need to schedule a time to provide testimony in the Maddox custody case. Of course. Is this regarding your sessions with Calder? Yes. And Janet needs to know this isn't just about the abandonment. There's been ongoing emotional abuse. I have documentation going back months. Dorian Pike called Howard on a Tuesday evening while Howard was helping Calder with homework. The name on the caller ID meant nothing to Howard, but the voice on the other end of the line would change everything. Mr. Maddox? This is Dorian Pike. I think we need to talk about Karen. Howard stepped out onto the back deck, closing the door behind him. I'm sorry, who is this? I was Karen's boyfriend before you. I've been following the custody case in the news, and there are things you need to know, such as the fact that what happened to you and your son isn't the first time. Karen and her mother have been running this game for years. Howard felt his pulse quicken. What game? The long con. Find a man with money and emotional vulnerabilities, move in, become indispensable, then start the financial pressure. When the mark doesn't cooperate, escalate until he breaks. You have proof of this. I have text messages, emails, recorded phone calls. Karen left me exactly the same way she left you, Mr. Maddox. Except instead of your son, she used my daughter. Howard gripped the phone tighter. Your daughter, from my first marriage. Karen moved in with us, played the perfect stepmother role for 8 months. When I refused to give Lenora 30 grand for her medical emergency, Karen picked up my daughter from school and took her to a shopping mall. Left her sitting in the food court while she called me, hysterical, saying Emma was missing and she was too upset to think clearly. Jesus. Took 3 hours to find Emma. Karen found her at the mall, claimed she'd been searching everywhere, played the relieved stepmother perfectly. It wasn't until later that I realized Karen's story didn't add up. What made you suspicious? Emma told me Karen had bought her ice cream and told her to wait at the food court table while she went to find me. My 8-year-old daughter sat there for 3 hours thinking her stepmother was coming back with Daddy. Howard felt sick. What did you do? I threw her out. But I didn't have proof of what she'd done, and her mother had paid for the best lawyer in Portland. Karen got half my assets in the settlement and moved on to her next target. You think I was the next target? I know you were. Want to see the text messages between Karen and her mother where they discuss you by name? 2 hours later, Howard sat in Janet Morrison's office reading printouts of text exchanges between Karen and Lenora that dated back to 6 months before Howard met Karen. The messages were damning. Lenora found another prospect. Howard Maddox, structural engineer in Bend. Widower with a 6-year-old son. Karen, how much is he worth? Lenora, house is worth $800K, makes $150K annually, minimal debt. And get this, his wife died of cancer. Classic emotional vulnerability. Karen, kids are harder to work with than just the men. Lenora, the boy is a selling point. He needs a mother figure. You're perfect for that role. Howard read message after message documenting Karen's calculated pursuit of him. She learned his schedule by watching the coffee shop where he bought breakfast every morning. She'd researched his wife's death through newspaper obituaries. She'd even arranged to accidentally meet him at the library when she knew Calder would be with him. This is from 2 weeks before the church incident, Janet said, pointing to a particular exchange. Karen, he won't budge on the money from Mother. 50,000 might as well be 50 million as far as he's concerned. Lenora, then it's time for the nuclear option. Men like Howard only understand loss. Make him face losing what matters most. Karen, you're talking about using Calder. Lenora, I'm talking about teaching Howard that his family isn't guaranteed. Sometimes children get confused, end up in places where they're safe, but their fathers panic. These things happen when mothers are under extreme stress. Karen, if this backfires, Lenora, it won't. Howard's weakness is that boy. He'll do anything to protect him, including reconsidering his position on family emergencies. Howard set the papers down carefully. How many other men? According to Pike, at least 4 others that he knows about. The pattern is always the same target: emotionally vulnerable men with money. Play the perfect girlfriend role. Move in, then start the financial pressure for Lenora's various crises. And when they refuse, escalation. Sometimes it's threatening to leave. Sometimes it's creating emergencies that require immediate cash. With you and Pike, it was using the children to create panic. Pike has evidence of the others. Some. But Howard, these text messages alone are going to destroy Karen's case. No family court judge is going to award custody to someone who planned to use a child as leverage in a financial dispute. Howard stood up and walked to the window. Outside, Ben's downtown looked peaceful in the evening light. Families walked along the sidewalks, kids rode bikes, normal life continued. But Howard felt like he was looking at it all from behind glass. I want them destroyed, he said quietly. Howard, not just defeated in court, destroyed. Both of them, Karen and her mother. He turned back to Janet. What can we do with this evidence beyond the custody case? Janet was quiet for a moment. Fraud charges, potentially. If we can prove they intentionally misrepresented themselves to obtain money under false pretenses. The pattern of behavior across multiple victims could support a criminal case. Then that's what we're going to do. The courtroom in the Deschutes County Courthouse was smaller than Howard had expected. He sat at the plaintiff's table next to Janet Morrison, watching Karen and her lawyer, Marcus Weber, arrange their files across the aisle. Karen wore a simple blue dress and minimal makeup, playing the role of the remorseful wife who'd made a terrible mistake. Judge Patricia Henley called the court to order at 9 o'clock sharp. She was a woman in her early 60s with gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "We're here for the custody hearing in the matter of Maddox versus Carrington Maddox," Judge Henley announced. "Mr. Weber, you may present your opening statement." Weber stood up, straightening his expensive suit. "Your Honor, this case is about a woman who made a terrible mistake during a mental health crisis brought on by her husband's emotional neglect and financial callousness." Howard kept his expression neutral, but his hands clenched into fists under the table. Karen Carrington Maddox found herself caught between her husband's rigid control and her elderly mother's desperate financial situation. When Mr. Maddox refused to help prevent his mother-in-law from losing her home, my client experienced what can only be described as a psychological break. Weber walked closer to the judge's bench. "The incident at the church was not planned abandonment, Your Honor. It was the desperate act of a woman who felt trapped between impossible choices. Mrs. Maddox immediately regretted her actions and has since sought counseling to address the underlying issues that led to her poor judgment." Howard watched Karen dab at her eyes with a tissue. "We will show that Mr. Maddox's pattern of emotional distance and financial control created an atmosphere of isolation that contributed directly to my client's crisis. We ask that the court recognize that one moment of poor judgment should not overshadow Mrs. Maddox's genuine love for her stepson." Janet Morrison rose for her opening statement. "Your Honor, the defense would have you believe that abandoning a 6-year-old child at a church was a spontaneous act of desperation. The evidence will show that it was actually the culmination of a calculated pattern of manipulation and fraud." She walked to the evidence table and picked up a folder. "We will present text messages between the defendant and her mother that prove this abandonment was planned as a pressure tactic to force Mr. Maddox to provide $50,000. We will show that Mrs. Maddox has used similar tactics against at least 4 other men over the past 8 years." Karen's face went pale. "We will demonstrate that Mrs. Maddox deliberately targeted Mr. Maddox because he was a widower with assets and emotional vulnerabilities. We will prove that her entire relationship with Mr. Maddox was based on fraud and manipulation." Janet turned to face Karen directly. "This is not a case about a mother's love, Your Honor. This is a case about a predator who used a child as a weapon in a financial extortion scheme." The first witness was Kendra Fox. She testified about her sessions with Calder, describing months of emotional manipulation that had made the boy feel unwanted in his own home. "In my professional opinion," Kendra said, "Calder has been subjected to ongoing psychological abuse designed to make him feel insecure about his place in his father's affections." Weber's cross-examination was aggressive. "Isn't it possible that a child might misinterpret normal step-parent adjustment issues as deliberate cruelty? Not in this case. Calder's reports were consistent over many months and included specific statements about being reminded that his father loved his deceased mother more, about being told he was a burden, about being made to feel responsible for his stepmother's unhappiness. But you never witnessed these alleged statements directly." "No, but I've been counseling children for 12 years. I know the difference between a child processing normal family stress and a child reporting emotional abuse." Dorian Pike testified next, describing the pattern of manipulation he'd experienced and providing the court with copies of the text messages between Karen and Lenora. Weber tried to discredit Pike's testimony. "Isn't it true that you have a restraining order against Mrs. Maddox?" "No, that's not true. Didn't you threaten her after your breakup?" "I told her I would expose her if she tried the same scheme on another man. I consider that a public service, not a threat." When Janet introduced the text messages as evidence, the courtroom fell silent as she read key exchanges aloud. Karen's face crumbled as her own words condemned her. Judge Henley reviewed the messages with visible disgust. When she looked up, her expression was thunderous. "This is not a custody dispute," Judge Henley declared. "This is premeditated emotional terrorism." Weber's cross-examination of Howard was his last chance to salvage the case. "Mr. Maddox, isn't it true that you refused to help your wife's elderly mother avoid foreclosure?" "I refused to give Lenora Carrington $50,000, yes. Even though you could afford it." "I could afford it. That doesn't mean I was obligated to pay it. You knew that your refusal would cause your wife extreme distress. I knew Karen would be disappointed. I didn't know she would abandon my son at a church. Isn't it true that you've used your first wife's memory as an excuse to avoid emotional intimacy? Howard's jaw tightened. My first wife has nothing to do with this case. Doesn't she? Haven't you held your current wife to an impossible standard based on your idealization of your deceased spouse? Janet stood up. Objection. Relevance. Sustained. But Weber pressed on. Mr. Maddox, have you ever told your wife that she could never live up to your first wife's memory? No. Have you ever compared her unfavorably to your deceased wife? No. Have you ever made her feel like a replacement rather than a partner? Howard was quiet for a long moment. I married Karen because I thought she would be good for Calder. I thought she could be the mother he needed. So you did use her as a replacement. I used my judgment as a father to try to give my son a complete family. Karen's actions have shown me that my judgment was wrong. When court recessed for lunch, Howard found himself alone in the hallway with Karen. She approached him hesitantly, her eyes red from crying. Howard, please. Can we talk? We're talking through our lawyers now. This whole thing got out of hand. Mother pressured me, and I made a terrible mistake. But I do love Calder, and I love you. Howard looked at her for a long moment. You left my son sitting alone in a church pew because I wouldn't give you money. There's no explanation that makes that acceptable. I was desperate. Mother was going to lose her house, and you wouldn't even consider helping. Your mother has been manipulating men for money for years, Karen. You've been helping her. I was just another mark. That's not true. Howard pulled out his phone and showed her a screenshot of one of her text messages to Lenora. Classic emotional vulnerability, he read aloud. You wrote that about me 6 months before we met. Karen's face went white. Where did you get that? Dorian Pike kept copies of everything. Apparently, you're not as careful about covering your tracks as you think. Howard, please. We can work through this. I'll get help. I'll make things right. You made things right when you drove away from that church. Howard put his phone back in his pocket. You showed me exactly who you are. I believe you. While the custody battle played out in court, Howard was quietly working on a different kind of justice. 3 days after Dorian Pike's testimony, he placed an anonymous call to the IRS fraud hotline. I'd like to report suspected tax evasion, he told the agent who answered. The information Howard provided was detailed and specific. Lenora Carrington had been receiving unreported cash payments from the men her daughter manipulated. She'd hidden assets offshore to avoid paying creditors after her husband's fraud conviction. She'd claimed false deductions for charitable giving that had never occurred. Most damning of all, Howard had discovered that Lenora had been collecting Social Security disability payments for a back injury while simultaneously teaching yoga classes at an upscale studio in Lake Oswego. We'll need documentation to support these allegations, the IRS agent said. Check with Dorian Pike in Portland. He has financial records. Also check with the Cascade Yoga Studio. They should have employment records showing cash payments to Lenora Carrington over the past 2 years. Howard hung up the phone and returned to his normal routine. He picked up Calder from school, helped with homework, made dinner, read bedtime stories. But in the back of his mind, he was waiting. The raid on Lenora's house happened on a Thursday morning. Howard learned about it when Janet Morrison called him at work. They arrested your mother-in-law this morning. IRS fraud investigation. They found evidence of unreported income, hidden assets, and fraudulent disability claims. How much trouble is she in? Federal tax evasion, wire fraud, Social Security fraud. She's looking at serious prison time if convicted. That afternoon, Karen called Howard directly for the first time since the custody hearing began. They arrested my mother, she said without preamble. I heard. Did you do this? Howard was quiet for a moment. Your mother brought this on herself, Karen. Just like you brought the custody battle on yourself. She's 63 years old, Howard. Prison could kill her. She should have thought of that before she spent years defrauding the government and helping you manipulate vulnerable men. Please, I'll do anything. I'll drop the custody fight. I'll disappear. I'll never contact you or call her again. Just help her. No, Howard, please. You used my son as a weapon, Karen. You made him feel unwanted in his own home for months. then abandoned him at church because I wouldn't give you money. There's no amount of begging that's going to make me help you or your mother. What do you want from me? Nothing. I want you to go away and stay away. I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to learn that you can't manipulate and abuse people without eventually paying a price. I made a mistake. You made a choice. A calculated, planned choice to hurt a child to get what you wanted. That's not a mistake, Karen. That's who you are. The line went quiet for a long moment. I underestimated you, Karen said finally. Yes, you did. The final confrontation came 2 weeks later at a coffee shop in downtown Bend. Karen had called Janet Morrison, requesting a private meeting with Howard to discuss settling the custody case out of court. Against his better judgment, Howard agreed. Karen looked different than she had in court. Her perfect makeup was gone, her designer clothes replaced with jeans and a sweater. She looked like what she was, a woman whose world was collapsing around her. Thank you for meeting me, she said as Howard sat down across from her. You have 5 minutes. I want to withdraw my custody petition. I'll sign whatever papers your lawyer wants. Full custody to you, no visitation, no contact. Howard studied her face. What's the catch? No catch. I can't fight this anymore. Mother's been arrested, her assets are frozen, and my lawyer says the evidence against me is overwhelming. So you're giving up. I'm accepting reality. Karen wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. Howard, what happened at the church, it wasn't supposed to go that far. But it did go that far. Mother said it would just scare you for a few hours. Make you realize that family emergencies require family solutions. She said you'd be so grateful to get Calder back that you'd agree to help with the house. Howard felt the familiar cold anger settle in his chest. And you believe that abandoning my son would make me grateful? I hoped you'd understand that I was desperate, that I made a terrible choice, but that it came from love for my mother. It came from greed, Karen. Everything you've done since the day you met me has been about money. That's not true. Howard pulled out his phone and scrolled to the text messages. Classic emotional vulnerability. That's what you call me to your mother. House worth $800K, makes $150K annually, minimal debt. You researched my wife's death and my financial situation before you ever spoke to me. Karen's composure cracked. You don't understand what it was like growing up the way I did. Having everything, then losing it all overnight. Watching my mother struggle to keep up appearances while everything fell apart. So you decided to make that other people's problem. I decided to survive. Do you know what it's like to go from private schools and country clubs to working retail and living in a 2-bedroom apartment? No, but I know what it's like to watch the person you love die slowly and painfully. I know what it's like to explain to a 2-year-old why mommy isn't coming home. I know what it's like to raise a child alone while grieving and trying to hold everything together. Howard leaned forward. The difference is that my tragedy made me want to protect other people from pain. Your tragedy made you want to inflict pain on others to get what you wanted. I never meant to hurt Calder, but you did hurt him. For months, you made him feel unwanted and insecure. You told him he reminded you that I love someone else first. You made a 6-year-old child feel responsible for your unhappiness. I was struggling with the situation. You were grooming him, making him feel so insecure that he'd be desperate for your approval, making him think his place in our family depended on your mood. Karen started crying. I know I made mistakes. Stop calling them mistakes. Howard's voice stayed level, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Mistakes are accidental. What you did was deliberate. You targeted me because I was vulnerable. You researched my wife's death and my son's need for a mother figure. You played a role designed to make me feel like I'd found someone who understood my life. Howard, please. You didn't just abandon my son. You made him think I would abandon him too. You made him believe that love is conditional, that families aren't permanent, that he has to earn his place in his own home. I can make it right. No, you can't. The damage is done. Calder will spend years in therapy learning to trust again. He'll always carry the memory of being left alone in that church, wondering if the people who claim to love him might disappear. Karen sobbed openly now. What do you want me to do? I want you to disappear. I want you to sign the papers giving me full custody with no visitation rights. I want you to agree never to contact Calder again. I want you to understand that you're not welcome in our lives. And if I do that, then I won't pursue criminal charges against you for child endangerment and extortion. Karen wiped her eyes. That's it? No forgiveness? No second chance? Howard stood up from the table. You made your peace the day you walked away from a 6-year-old boy. We don't answer ghosts. He left her sitting in the coffee shop, crying into her hands. Judge Henley called the court to order at 10 o'clock on Monday morning for what everyone expected to be the final day of the custody hearing. Howard sat next to Janet Morrison, watching Karen and Marcus Weber shuffle through papers at the defense table. Karen's face was pale and drawn, her expensive clothes replaced with a simple black suit that made her look like she was attending a funeral. Before we proceed with closing arguments, Judge Henley announced, I understand there's been a development in this case. Mr. Weber. Weber stood up slowly. Your Honor, my client wishes to withdraw her petition for custody and visitation rights. She agrees to full custody being awarded to Mr. Maddox with no restrictions. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Howard felt Calder squeeze his hand. He'd brought his son to court for this final hearing, wanting him to see how justice worked. Mrs. Maddox, Judge Henley said, please stand and confirm this decision. Karen rose unsteadily. Yes, Your Honor. I withdraw my petition. I agree that Howard should have full custody of Calder. Do you understand that this means you're giving up all parental rights? No visitation, no contact, no involvement in decisions about the child's welfare. I understand. And you're making this decision voluntarily? No one has coerced or threatened you. Karen glanced at Howard. No one has threatened me, Your Honor. Judge Henley made notes on her papers. Very well. However, before I grant this motion, I want to address some things that have come to light during these proceedings. She pulled out a thick folder. Mrs. Maddox, the evidence presented in this case shows a disturbing pattern of calculated manipulation and abuse. The text messages between you and your mother prove that the abandonment of this child was premeditated as part of an extortion scheme. Karen kept her eyes downcast. Furthermore, Judge Henley continued, I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office for possible criminal charges related to child endangerment and extortion. From the gallery, Lenora Carrington suddenly stood up, her face twisted with rage. This is all nonsense. My daughter did nothing wrong. You judges are all corrupt. Bailiff, Judge Henley's voice cut through the outburst. Remove Mrs. Carrington from my courtroom immediately. As the bailiff moved toward her, Lenora continued shouting. You're destroying an innocent woman's life. I'll have your job for this. Mrs. Carrington, you are in contempt of court. Judge Henley's gavel came down hard. Bailiff, place her under arrest. Lenora was handcuffed and led from the courtroom, still screaming threats at the judge. In my 30 years on the bench, I have never seen such clear evidence of a child being used as a weapon in an adult dispute. What you did wasn't a mistake or a moment of poor judgment. It was emotional terrorism. Judge Henley's voice grew harder. You deliberately made this child feel insecure in his own home. You told him he was unwanted, that he was a reminder of his father's previous marriage, that his place in the family was contingent on your mood. Your Honor, Weber started to speak. I'm not finished, counselor. Judge Henley silenced him with a look. Mrs. Maddox, you then escalated your psychological abuse by physically abandoning this child at a church, leaving him to wonder if the adults in his life could be trusted to keep him safe. Howard felt Calder's grip on his hand tighten. They'd prepared for this moment, but hearing it laid out so starkly was still difficult. Therefore, Judge Henley continued, while I'm granting your motion to withdraw your petition, I'm also ordering a full psychological evaluation and requiring you to complete at least 2 years of intensive therapy before you'll be allowed any contact with minor children. She turned to Howard. Mr. Maddox, you're awarded full custody of Calder Maddox with no restrictions. Mrs. Maddox is ordered to have no contact with the child unless and until she completes the court-ordered treatment and petitions for supervised visitation. Thank you, Your Honor. Furthermore, Judge Henley said, I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office for possible criminal charges related to child endangerment and extortion. Karen's knees buckled slightly. Weber steadied her with a hand on her arm. Mrs. Maddox, I want to be very clear about something. The evidence shows that you targeted Mr. Maddox because he was emotionally vulnerable and financially stable. You researched his personal tragedy and used it to manipulate him into a relationship. You then used his child as leverage when he wouldn't comply with your demands. Judge Henley leaned forward. This court deals with many custody disputes, but what you did goes far beyond a custody dispute. This was a calculated campaign of psychological abuse against a child. If I had the authority to do so, I would sentence you to prison myself. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. This court is adjourned. As they left the courthouse, Howard knelt down to Calder's level. How are you feeling, buddy? Good. Karen can't hurt us anymore, right? Right? She can't hurt us anymore. Dad, yeah, I'm glad she's gone. Is that bad? Howard pulled his son into a hug. No, Calder. It's not bad. It's honest. In the courthouse parking lot, Janet Morrison handed Howard the signed custody agreement. It's over, Howard. You won. We both won, Howard said, looking down at Calder. We're going home. As they walked to their truck, Howard saw Lenora Carrington being led into the courthouse in handcuffs for her arraignment. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit and looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past month. Their eyes met briefly, and Howard saw nothing but hatred in her expression. He felt nothing at all. Howard sold the house in Bend 3 weeks after the custody hearing. The 4-bedroom suburban home where he'd tried to build a life with Karen felt contaminated now, full of memories he wanted to leave behind. He found a smaller place on the outskirts of Sisters, Oregon, a town 30 minutes northwest that felt like a different world. The new house sat on 5 acres with views of the Cascade Mountains. It had 3 bedrooms, a workshop where Howard could build furniture, and enough space for Calder to run and explore safely. More importantly, it had no history with Karen. Can I paint my room blue? Calder asked as they walked through the empty house on moving day. Whatever color you want, buddy. And can we get a dog? Howard smiled. We can get a dog. The move took 2 days. Howard had sold most of the furniture from the Bend house, keeping only the pieces that predated Karen. Calder's room was set up first: his bed, his bookshelf, his toy chest, and the rocking chair where Howard had read him stories since he was 2 years old. It feels different here, Calder said on their first night in the new house. They were sitting on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains orange and purple. Different how? Safer. Like nobody can find us who we don't want to find us. Howard understood exactly what his son meant. The isolation wasn't loneliness, it was peace. Kendra Fox visited the following week to check on Calder's adjustment. She found him building a fort in the backyard, happy and relaxed in a way she hadn't seen during their sessions in Bend. He's doing well, she told Howard as they watched Calder play. Children are resilient, but he'll need continued support as he processes what happened. We'll keep working with Dr. Patterson, Howard said. Dr. Patterson was a child psychologist in Bend who specialized in trauma recovery. Good. And Howard, you should consider some counseling yourself. You've been through trauma too. Howard nodded, but didn't commit to anything. He dealt with problems by solving them, not by talking about them. Karen was gone, Lenora was in prison, and Calder was safe. In his mind, the problem was solved. 2 months after the move, Howard got a call from an unexpected source, Dorian Pike. How are you and your son adjusting? Dorian asked. We're doing well. Better than well, actually. Good to hear. I wanted you to know that I've been contacted by a victims advocacy group. They want to use our cases to warn other potential targets about Karen and her mother's methods. What does that involve? Interviews, maybe some media coverage. The goal is to create enough public awareness that other men won't fall into the same trap. Howard considered this. Would Karen's name be made public? Absolutely. The whole pattern would be exposed. Then yes. Let's do it. The story broke 3 weeks later in the Portland Tribune under the headline, Mother-Daughter Con Team Preyed on Vulnerable Men. The article detailed Karen and Lenora's 8-year scheme, including interviews with 5 victims and copies of the text messages that had been used as evidence in the custody case. Howard's phone rang constantly for a week as reporters wanted interviews and other potential victims came forward. He declined most media requests, but spoke to the detective investigating Karen for potential criminal charges. We've identified at least 7 other men who were targeted, Detective Morrison told him. The pattern is always the same: find emotionally vulnerable men with assets, move in quickly, then start the financial pressure. Any other children involved? 3 others. None were abandoned like your son, but all reported feeling unwanted and manipulated by Karen. Good. Build the strongest case you can. Karen was arrested 2 weeks later on charges of child endangerment, extortion, and fraud. She posted bail, but was ordered to stay away from Howard and Calder. The trial was scheduled for the following spring. Howard didn't plan to attend. He'd said everything he needed to say. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning in November, 6 months after Karen had been arrested. Howard almost deleted it without reading it. The sender was listed as K. Carrington Legal, and he assumed it was spam. But something made him click on it. Howard, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but my lawyer says I should try to make contact before my sentencing next month. I've been in therapy like the court ordered, and I understand now how much damage I caused. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. I'm not asking to see Calder because I know that would hurt him. I just wanted you to know that I'm truly sorry for what I did. You and Calder deserve better than what I gave you. The woman I was when I lived with you, that wasn't really me. It was someone I created to survive after my family lost everything. I know that doesn't excuse what I did to Calder, but I want you to know that hurting him was never my intention, that I'm going to prison for 18 months. When I get out, I'm moving to another state and starting over. You'll never hear from me again. Please tell Calder that his stepmother's mistakes had nothing to do with him. He's a good boy who deserves to feel loved and wanted. I hope someday he can forgive me, even if you can't. Karen Howard read the email twice, then thought about everything that had led to this moment. Karen tries contacting him months later through a lawyer to make peace. He spoke quietly to himself, his final words on the entire ordeal. She made her peace the day she walked away from a 6-year-old boy. We don't answer ghosts. He deleted the email without responding. He walked to the kitchen where Calder was eating breakfast before school. Who was that on your computer, Dad? Nobody important, buddy. You ready for your spelling test? Yeah. Mrs. Jenkins says I'm the best speller in 2nd grade. That's my boy. Later that morning, after dropping Calder at school, Howard drove to the cemetery where June was buried. He hadn't visited her grave since before he'd married Karen, but something about the email made him want to talk to his first wife. The headstone was simple granite with her name, dates, and the words beloved wife and mother. Howard sat on the grass beside it, something he'd never done before. I screwed up, he said quietly. I brought someone into our home who hurt our son. I was so focused on giving Calder a mother that I didn't pay attention to who Karen really was. The November wind moved through the pine trees surrounding the cemetery. But I fixed it. Karen's gone, Calder's safe, and we're okay. Better than okay. Actually, he's happy now in a way he wasn't when she was around. Howard pulled a few weeds from around the headstone. I don't think I'll marry again. Calder and I, we're a good team. We don't need anyone else. He stayed for another few minutes, then drove to work. That evening, he helped Calder with homework, made dinner, and read 2 chapters of Charlotte's Web before bedtime. Their routine was simple and peaceful. 9 o'clock. Howard sat at his home office reviewing plans for a new school construction project. His phone buzzed with another email from Karen's lawyer, but he deleted it without reading it. Some people deserved second chances. Some people deserve forgiveness. Some people deserve the benefit of the doubt. Karen wasn't one of those people. Outside his window, the Cascade Mountains stood silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Howard felt something he hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. His son was safe, his life was his own, and the people who had tried to destroy his family were facing the consequences of their choices. He didn't celebrate their downfall because he wasn't a cruel man. But he didn't mourn it either because he wasn't a fool. Justice, Howard had learned, sometimes looked exactly like this: quiet, final, and absolute. 6 months later, Howard received a letter from the Oregon Department of Corrections informing him that Karen had been transferred to a federal facility to serve an additional sentence for mail fraud related to her mother's schemes. She would be in prison for at least 3 years. Howard filed the letter away without emotion and went to pick up Calder from school.